Recording for this meeting has begun.
Okay. Good afternoon, everyone. This is Captain Angela Matangwa. I am happy to provide this Preparing for Promotion Success presentation, and I'm doing so in my capacity as a senior officer and as a former promotion coordinator for the Commission Corps for 3 years. So I hope some of the information that I'll be sharing today will be helpful to you all. I do ask that if there are any questions about the information that I'm bringing, that you hold your questions until the end, and I'll be happy to take them at that time. So why don't we go ahead and get started? So you'll note that the actual title of the presentation is Preparing for Promotion Success. Everyone prepares for promotion, but what we want to make sure that we are doing, and by we, all of the officers in the Indian Health Service, what we're doing is not just preparing for promotion itself, but preparing to be successful for promotion. And what I found is in talking to many IHS officers, you guys work so hard. You have a lot of different and varying duties, lots of collateral duties. I'm convinced there is not one IHS officer who doesn't have a collateral duty. Um, but what I'm finding is that some of the information may not be very well presented in your promotion document. So all the great work that you're doing may not be reflected in the documents in a way that really makes it clear and evident for promotion board members to be able to see it. So really that's my goal today, is to help you think about who your audience is and how to craft your documents in a way that really will help them see very quickly all the great work that you're doing and how that great work measures up against the promotion benchmarks. So today I just want to talk about the benchmarks itself. Absolutely important, very key to promotion success, because those benchmarks and the theoretical best qualified officer is what you're going to be scored against. Not each other, not other officers, but this theoretical best qualified officer that is determined by the promotion benchmarks. And then we're going to spend the most time talking about purposeful promotion documents. That's because that's what promotion board members are going to see. They don't get to interview you. They don't get to, have a video chat with you or to see a video of you. All they have to get to know who you are and what you've done and what the impact is by the documents that are in your secure area and in your EOPF. And so, therefore, those documents are really key to officers being successful. Administrative requirements, also extremely important. I won't spend very much time on them, but I feel like I have to talk about them because without meeting them, an officer who otherwise scored highly in the promotion board process and would have been successful for promotion will not be promoted if you do not meet even one of those administrative requirements. And it happens every year. And it's so disappointing and sad for that officer who worked so hard just to have it really ripped from their grasp because they failed to meet an administrative requirement that in some cases was not that difficult to meet. So we have to talk about it. And I'll just give you some tips and some takeaways from this. And then we'll just talk a little bit about where you can find help should you have questions. So first, let's talk about the benchmarks. So benchmarks are levels of achievement for each category and grade. Benchmarks are not requirements, they are guidelines, and they help to determine the best qualified officer. So officers should not look at benchmarks as a checkbox. I have to do all of these things. Really, you want to look at the ones that meet your professional goals and will help you develop in the direction that you want to go and make sure that you meet those. Those benchmarks determine, as I mentioned, the best qualified officer. So that officer probably doesn't exist. And if that officer does, then we would generally wonder what else they're doing if they are able to accomplish all of these things. Now, there are some officers who, through the course of a career, can hit upon all those things, but it's really rare to have someone meet all of the benchmarks, and that's really not the goal. But it is the goal to have officers that are well-rounded, that are performing well at their agencies, but also involved in the Commission Corps and continually to develop themselves. And so that's really the goal of the benchmarks. Most often for IHS officers, those where IHSers may not meet the benchmarks are in awards, the billet grade, mobility or lack thereof, and then officership activities. And we'll talk a little bit more about each of those later on in the presentation. So these are the promotion precepts, and these are really applicable to all competitive promotions. Now, just a friendly reminder, because I had this question come up from an Alaska area officer recently, and that is even for permanent grade, for permanent O2 and permanent O3, all permanent grade promotions have to be reviewed by a promotion board. Even O2 and O3, which are called non-competitive because they have a 100% success rate, they are still reviewed by a promotion board. That means if you're eligible for permanent O2 or O3, you still have to have your CV updated, you still have to have an OS, you still have to have an ROS, you still have to take care of all of the requirements for permanent grade promotion that are listed on the promotion checklist. Otherwise, for temporary grade promotion, competitive promotions are those that are O4 and above for most categories, and then O5 and above for the medical and dental categories. So here are the promotion precepts. So the first one, performance rating and your reviewing official statement. That's going to include your CORs, your awards, your reviewing official statement, your ROS, 40% of the total numerical score. It's not by accident that that is the single largest precept, weighted precept, because your performance in your position is the most important thing. The Corps wants you to perform well at the Indian Health Service or wherever you are assigned, but then also, as I mentioned, maintain officership activities and be involved in your Public Health Service Commission Corps career. And so while that's the single largest percentage, the other three precepts add up to 60%. So you really cannot neglect any of these. They are all important in terms of preparing you and allowing you to be competitive for promotion. Precept 2, education, training, and professional development. That's going to include your licenses, advanced degrees, certifications, continuing education, and then public health and leadership training. Precept 1 is the same for all categories. Precept 2 and Precept 3 can be category specific, so they can vary a little bit depending on the category. So it's important for you to look at your promotion benchmarks on the CCMIS website. Make sure you're looking at the correct years. So for this coming year, it's promotion year 2020. You'll want to look at your categories benchmarks and make sure that you are seeing what the expectations are and what those guidelines are. That's going to be 20% of the total numerical score. Precept 3, career progression and potential. That's increased responsibility. That's talking about your billet level. So over time, they want to see that over time, as you progress in your career, you're also taking on more responsibility. And so your billet grade should reflect that, moving up towards an O6 billet if you weren't already in one. So they want to see progressively higher levels of responsibility, and really your billet grade will demonstrate that. They want to see what's your current billet grade in relation to the rank for which you are being reviewed. So typically you need to be in the billet grade, the position grade, that's equivalent to the grade for which you're being considered. So for instance, if you are an O5 and you're up for O6, they really want to see you in an O6 billet because that's a way that demonstrates that you are capable of performing at the O6 level because you're already in that billet level. And so that is part of the benchmarks as well. What's your current billet level? Mobility, do you have it or not? And many of the categories will specify the number of moves, either geographic or programmatic, that they will expect an officer to have. So geographic being that you actually moved somewhere different in the country or in a state or where you actually have to, it's a physical move versus programmatic can be you moved from one agency to another agency, and that can even be in the same location in the same geographic area. For instance, IHS and the Bureau of Prisons, BOP, both have facilities in Tucson or facilities in Phoenix. If you move from IHS Phoenix to BOP Phoenix or vice versa, that's not a geographic move, but it is programmatic. Programmatic can also be moving from a major program within the same service unit even to another one in that service unit. So going from being in the inpatient or an outpatient clinic to moving to emergency department could be considered a programmatic move. So they look for that type of mobility. And then collateral duties, which are very important, which you guys should have no problem whatsoever listing collateral duties, I am convinced. That is 25% of the total numerical score, so pretty significant as well. And then lastly, professional contributions, basic readiness history, which is newly added to officership this year, and then service to the Corps. This was formerly called contributions to the Commission Corps or officership. Now readiness history is a part of the process and a part of the board's consideration. So as of this year, upcoming year, boards will now see your readiness history for the last 3 years. So basic readiness, it was always important as a condition of service, but it is that much more important. And so they will score your officership precept or precept 4. They'll take into account your basic readiness history. Newly added as well, we'll talk about it in the administrative requirements, is how basic readiness impacts your ability to even be reviewed by a promotion board now. So precept 4 will include things like your professional advisory committee, your PAC, or if you're in the HSO category, your PAG, your professional advisory group. Some of the Surgeon General sponsored advisory groups like the Junior Officer Advisory Group, JOAG, being a part of the Minority Officer Liaison Council, or MOLC. ANCOAC, the American Indian Alaska Native Commissioned Officer Advisory Committee, is another one. BCOG, the Black Commissioned Officers Advisory Group. There's a Sexual Orientation Advisory Group. There are lots of Surgeon General sponsored advisory groups, and so you definitely want to list those there. Your recruitment activity, mentoring, PHS support activities, and then again, basic readiness. That's 15%. We're going to spend significant time talking about the officer statement as well as the reviewing official statement because those are important. And those are areas where I see that IHS officers need the most input and guidance in terms of understanding what goes into those documents and just as importantly, what does not go into them and how to format them as well. So looking at the benchmarks, some of the common pitfalls. So I mentioned awards. A lot of IHS officers are lacking awards. My team and I are really working on changing that. So we're making changes to the awards program. We've overhauled the the awards board, made it more diverse for category, for area, for as many things as you can think of. But we also want to put out some resources, which we will in the new year, that will really, we hope, make it much easier for nominators to know what makes a good justification and at what level, and helps people feel more comfortable crafting justifications to nominate core officers. So if you don't have awards though, or if it's been a while, please consider discussing with your supervisor whether they feel like you have accomplished things that would be worthy of an award. And when you have that conversation, definitely be prepared to say, here are the things that I feel like that I've done that perhaps if you agree could warrant a justification. Also be prepared to have to draft the justification yourself. Maybe not ideal, but we all know how it is. And sometimes that may be what it takes in order to have it written. People are just so busy. And even when the intent is there and they want to do it, just to make sure sometimes that it does get done, recognizing how busy people are, we sometimes have to write these things for ourselves. So don't be afraid to do that. And don't be afraid to have that conversation with your supervisor. They do look at whether you have what the level of your awards are, as well as whether they are recent or not. So we want to encourage officers to, every now and again, as appropriate, doesn't have to be every year. Don't be award chasers. That's not necessarily the goal either, but it's really to accurately and adequately capture the great work you're doing at an appropriate time frame. So maybe that's every 3 years or every 4 years, especially as you move up the ladder towards the higher level individual honor awards. Reviewing official statement, we're going to talk a lot more about that, and I'm going to show you some examples or an example of one that is well written and one that maybe could have used a little work, so you get a sense of what I'm talking about in some of my tips. But what I've seen is that either the time and effort have not really been put into it, and maybe the officer didn't give the reviewing official enough time to prepare or didn't help them out with bullet points, or or sometimes the reviewing official statement doesn't capture or address some issues or areas of weakness in the officer's file that maybe it could have helped address. So, and again, we'll talk more about it. Billet level, I kind of talked about that. Some officers, it will be a challenge to be promoted if you're, depending on your billet levels. As I mentioned, like if you're an 05 going up for 06, typically the benchmarks will expect you to be in an 06 billet. If you're not in that, if you're in an 05 billet, it will, in all transparency, make it more difficult for you to be promoted. It's not impossible, but it means the rest of your file has to be really great. But that billet level is, as I mentioned, a way that board members have a demonstration that you are already capable of performing at that level, which is what they want to see. Mobility, again, officers, IHS officers sometimes lack mobility. And within the Indian Health Service, we actually encourage officers and civilian team members or tribal employees to stay in one place, right, and cultivate those relationships with our tribal partners and stakeholders and with our patients. And so the way the benchmarks have been written, it maybe feels like a little bit of a disincentive. I think that may change in the future as IHS and other agencies with patient care missions are prioritized by the core. I think we'll start to see the benchmarks reflect those patient care missions. But mobility is addressed in the actual benchmarks, and it varies depending on the category. So you will definitely want to know what the requirement is for your individual category. But as I mentioned, there are
I
different types of
concur if you
mobility, but there are
leave
also
them
ways
certain
of
colors.
addressing,
Yeah.
if you don't have mobility, there are ways of addressing it in your documents that can lead to the promotion board members not really penalizing you if you lack mobility and saying, oh, okay, I understand why they don't have mobility, and that makes sense to me. And so it becomes important then to
Well,
address it and make
hopefully it's
sure
not
that
terrible out there,
extra or
right?
important information is somewhere in your documents for them to see why you lack
Gonna
mobility. And we'll talk
people.
about it when we get to the reviewing
Okay.
official statement. The officer statement, we're going to spend a significant
Do you have card
amount
in
of
the front?
time looking at some examples and talking about what is good in them and what could be done differently or better. But what I see in general is sometimes officers, a lot of times, IHS officers put a lot of IHS specific information in their officer statement, and the officer statement is really only meant to capture PHS support activities. And then sometimes it's just not in the correct order or under the right section, or spaced well enough for board members to be able to really see the information. And we'll talk about all those things as well. And then commission core activities or the lack thereof. We're
Try
all
and give
really
it
busy
away.
at IHS, there's no question. But there's still an expectation of being involved in your commission core career, of carving out time to be involved with either your PAC or one of the Surgeon General sponsored advisory group, or in some way being involved. So we'll talk about some of those activities because probably those of you that are super busy and feel like I don't have time for those things, you probably are already doing some officership activities that you just don't even realize. And we'll talk more about that. So getting into the real heart of the presentation is talking about the documents, purposeful promotion documents. So starting with the CV. Absolutely has to be in the categories recommended format. Each of our categories has a recommended format. There may be some categories who, while they don't have a recommended format, they will give you examples of other of successful formats that have been successful for officers. But most, if not, I would say most have a category recommended format. It has to be in that format. If it's not, it's going to do two things. It's going to increase the amount of time it takes for board members to find your information because they're from your category. They know the recommended format and they expect to see it in that format. If they have to hunt for your information, you are doing yourself a disservice because they will move on to the next thing. Board members, when I was in the role, had on average about 10 minutes to review all the documents in an officer's file. That's CV, OS, ROS, COERS, and everything else, PIR, and everything else, 10 minutes on average. Right now, I've heard that it's less than that when I've heard CCHQ representatives talking about it, and they say on average 5 to 7 minutes. So I feel like it's decreasing. Bottom line is you want to make it very easy for board members to find your information so that they don't have to go hunting for it. So that's one that it may take more time if it's not in the recommended format. Also, it will increase the likelihood that they miss something because it's not where they expect it to be. Neither of those are good things. So just use the categories recommended format and make sure you know what the current format is. We have seen some categories in the last couple years switch up and make changes to the format within a few months of the promotion process. So you definitely want to keep up to speed by looking at the website for your PAC and PAG and knowing what that format is. You want to highlight important, impactful information. You don't want to highlight or bold everything. If you do, nothing's going to stand out, right? So you want to be judicious in your use of highlights or emphasis in your CV to really focus on those important, significant accomplishments and the impact of those accomplishments. You want to streamline your CV to address the benchmarks. This is not the CV that you would use to get a job. The CV, the purpose of the CV in your EOPF is all about promotion board and really nothing else. It's about boards. If you're up for a CPO one day, then maybe it can be about that at that time, but it's really about a commission core board process, and in this case, promotion boards. So you have to remember that. You want to streamline it to really address the benchmarks. If you're doing it in the categories recommended format, then you're probably already doing that because most of the recommended formats really do a good job of streamlining to really highlight how you meet the benchmarks. So considering your audience, again, it's the promotion board members, considering the diversity of the fields and expertise. So for instance, I'm an engineer. My board members are all going to be engineers, but I'm a chemical engineer, somewhat of a rarity in the Commission Corps, but definitely at the Indian Health Service. Most likely, the board members are going to be civil engineers, mechanical, environmental, and maybe a sprinkling of biomedical engineers. What does that mean for me? I have to keep that in mind. I cannot use acronyms that are very specific to the chemical engineering field, but not general engineers. I cannot, talk about professional organizations or even without really making sure I spell them out, or even talking about my duties in such a way where I just expect that everyone knows what that engineering term means. I can't make that assumption just because other engineers will be reviewing me. The fields are so diverse, especially if you are in the HSO category. You know that if you're a dental hygienist, your board members may be a podiatrist and a PA and a master's in public health. They may not be in your field at all. So you really have to make sure that you are providing enough information so that they understand what you did and the impact of it, but without getting too bogged down in the details. Because remember, they don't have a lot of time. They don't have time to read everything that you did. You may think it's great and wonderful and love to talk about what you did, but that's really not the purpose at that time, and they don't have time for it. So it's not that, it can be a challenge. It's not that easy. You have to find the balance between giving them enough information to know what you did and the impact, but not providing too much information. And so I always encourage officers who are up for promotion to have someone that is not in their field, that's maybe not even in the Corps. Take a look at their documents, like your spouse, like your mom or dad. If they can't understand quickly what you did and what you're saying, you have to assume a board member may not either and make the necessary corrections. Address job career related weaknesses. So in your CV, let's say you lack mobility, but you're in a specialty or you possess a specialty that is very rare, that not everyone possesses, and perhaps not even every service unit in IHS could accommodate it. So let's say you are a certified registered nurse anesthetist. There aren't that many facilities across IHS or even across the Corps where CRNA can be assigned. It has to be a hospital, right, where they perform surgeries and have need to anesthetize someone. That's not everywhere. So you can, under your current assignment, you can talk about, you can mention a brief statement about that sort of addresses that lack of mobility. And that is a way that when a board member sees that, they have latitude, or at least when I worked at CCHQ, they certainly did, and they're given that guidance and that orientation, they have some latitude to say, oh, okay, well, yeah, that person wouldn't have mobility, and so we understand that. So you're not going to be dinged on not having mobility. And we'll just go on to the next thing, or however they decide to score, which each board does determine how they scored. So you really cannot compare last year's score with this year's score. I'll just throw that in there. But you want to address what are either weaknesses or perceived weaknesses in your documents. And that is one way, and that's one example of addressing something under your current position on your CV. And then you want to back up statements with documentation. So for instance, if you mention in your CV that you accomplished this great thing and you were awarded a commendation medal for it, then that commendation medal better be on file, right? It's something that shouldn't be that challenging. And that's what I mean by backing it up with documentation. There are some things you may not be able to back up, like prior to 2016, if you got an IHS National Directors Award, you didn't get a certificate. You just got your crystal, or you got a group, something for the team. You may not have something to upload, and that's okay. But this is in the case where you do have control over it, then you want to make sure that that documentation is there. As an aside, we are now making sure that each National Directors Awards that the Corps officers receive a certificate showing that they received it, because we recognize officers want to upload that into their, their EOPF. So that's the CV. Moving on to the officer statement. The officer statement is a one-page document, allows you as the officer to summarize your support of PHS activities, your commitment to visibility as an officer, and vision and expectations of a career in the PHS Commission Corps, including commitment to the mission. Submit it through EDOCU, and it has to be on the current year's form. So if you were up for a promotion last year and you did an OS on the 2019 form, you have to copy and paste that onto the 2020 form. They will not accept it. It will be rejected. And who knows if you'll get notified that something was rejected. So you do have to put it on the 2020 form, upload it through eDocu, and you have to use the correct document date as well on that. And for 2020, the correct document date when you upload it is going to be 1/31/2020. So when you upload that, that would be the date that you would use. And I believe that has been corrected on the website and the documentation that was put out. It previously said 1/31/2019. It's actually 2020 for the promotion year, the 2020 promotion year. So the officer statement, I cannot say this enough because I see it all the time with IHSers and their officer statement. It really is the opportunity for you to list your support of PHS activities. What that means is you should not be listing your IHS duty, your IHS committee work for the most part, unless it is something that gives you visibility for bullet two. You don't need to say, I received 5 honor awards. That's not support of PHS activities. So there are a lot of things that I see officers putting there that do not belong. You've already put those types of things in your CV. And if they're IHS activities, they can be covered in your reviewing official statement. So it's not that they won't be captured, there's just a place for them, and the officer statement is not it. The officer statement is really about officership and what you do to support the Commission Core, the Public Health Service Commission Core activities and mission. So those types of activities for number one, so supportive PHS activities, mention your pack involvement, mentoring. Mentoring can be as a mentor or a protege or mentee. So if you're involved in mentoring, you can list that even if you are the one being mentored. And it doesn't always have to be formal. I mentor dozens of officers, but it's not through a formal EPAC, engineer pack mentoring program or anything like that, or JOAG. It's really, but it is a formal, sort of a formalized relationship in that they know they can call me and we may talk and touch base. How are things going? Yep, I'll look at your documents, that sort of thing. But it doesn't have to be formal. If you are involved in a tier 1 or tier 2 deployment team, and or if you deploy, these are supportive PHS core activities. Commissioned Officers Association, I mentioned any of the Surgeon General sponsored advisory groups. If you've been an aide de camp, you help with a promotion ceremony for a flag officer or retirement ceremony. There are so many things that you can talk about. If you're involved in one of the Surgeon General's initiatives, a committee for that perhaps could be listed there as well. So there are a lot of things that can be listed, but again, it's really about the core and not about the Indian Health Service for this particular document. The second bullet, commitment to visibility as an officer. Here's where you're talking about your activities are generally performed outside the duty station in uniform, that bring that positive attention to the core. So a community health fair, if you're doing like blood pressure screenings in the community and you're in uniform, that is commitment to visibility as an officer. If you go to a career day at your child's school and you're in uniform and you're talking about what it is to be a commissioned officer, that's visibility. If you go to a recruitment event at your university, a lunch and learn, or you set up a booth, that is a commitment to visibility as an officer. Any presentations that you do in uniform, publications, that's all bringing positive attention to the core. Your work in your professional organizations, committees, work groups, and things like that, bring attention to the core. DOD, if you're in DOD work groups or do work with the DOD or the VA, that can be visibility as an officer as well. So when officers, a lot of officers, I think, feel like they don't have very much of activities or things to put under there. If you think about it, you probably have more than you think, especially when you're involved in your community, which many of you are. The other thing is, if you don't have them, think about ways to create those opportunities. So, or think about ways that you do it anyway, but you haven't really looked for the opportunity to advance the core. Start to think about that if you need those opportunities. And then vision and expectations of a career in the core. So remember that it's saying a career, not just a year or two. So I see officers putting bullets that say, essentially this is what I'm going to do next year, but that's not what it's asking. It's asking for your vision and expectations of a career in the core. So avoid the flowery generic statements. I kind of giggle because that's what everybody does or thinks that they need to say, I'm going to be the best officer that I can be, or yeah, yeah, yeah. The officers on your promotion boards are O6 officers. That means they've been around the block a while. They recognize kind of fluff when they see it. really think about what your vision and expectations are. Um, you don't want to focus solely on Alaska or IHS or whatever your current organization is, right? Because why? It's talking about a career. And the expectation for a Corps officer in the Corps, at least right now, and what it's been historically, is that you have mobility, that you move somewhere, and that you are doing more and not just staying in one place. So you don't want to highlight that you have no intention of moving by saying, I'm going to stay here and never move, and that's my vision. No, you want to talk about what you're going to do more broadly. And I think that's what people do is they kind of get caught up on some specifics, and you just want to, for instance, you can expand on what you're already doing. So if you're working on a master's degree, you can say your vision is an expectation is to complete my master's degree and then use it to do ABC in the Commission Corps. Now that shows thought. That shows that it's specific to you and not generic and that kind of everything that, you know, something that every officer may put down that is so general. Um, and it's very credible, right? You're getting a master's degree. This is how you can use it to benefit the Corps and whatever agency that you are assigned to. How you can continue your work at the next level. So remember, like if you're an O5 and you're up for O6, board members and everything that you're giving them want to see what are you going to do as an O6 differently than you're doing as an O5. That's what you kind of want to think about when you're filling out this section. You want to highlight how you're going to take things to the next level. And then this is typically the shortest of the three parts of the OS. It really should be by design, right? So don't try to add things there when there really isn't much there. Um, I see officers trying to do that. This really should probably only be 3 bullets, 3 sentences, you know? So don't try to make it equal the other two sections. By design, the other two really should be larger. So let's get into some examples, shall we? So here is an actual example from an engineering officer. The names have been changed to protect the innocent. So in this case, it's I'm an engineer from the engineer category, but these are actual bullets taken from an example. So you can read it there, active member of EPAC recruitment and retention subcommittee. So this is under supportive PHS Commission Core activities, member of EPAC recruitment and retention subcommittee, provide recommendations and review documents for recruiting and application processes, one of 2 engineering category members nationally developing an online application process with DCCPR, which now would be CCHQ. Um, that's a good bullet, right? Because it talks about involvement in a pack, but it also doesn't just, and this is important, you don't want to just say I'm a member of an organization. You want to also say what you've contributed. If you're on a subcommittee, if you worked on a major project, if you coordinated something, if you wrote something, you want to specify some of those activities. And it can just be, you know, I'm the vice president. I feel like that says it all. President of it says a lot. You might want to put some major things you accomplished. The reason I say that is board members will make a distinction between officers who are just members in name only versus those who've actually participated and contributed. You know why? They know that when officers are up for promotion, they will all of a sudden become involved in 10 different things because they want to put it on their CV in their officer statement. They want to see that officers have been involved and have actually participated and accomplished things. So even if you don't have a lot of time to participate, you can join your PAC call. You can get on that call and ask a good question so that you have participated or make a comment about something that is being worked on or being addressed. Um, you also get your voice out there and your name out there. You never know who's going to be on your promotion board. And just remembering, oh yeah, she was on that PAC call 2 months ago. I remember when she made that great comment. It may not help you that much, but it also definitely won't hurt Now, where it can hurt you is if you embellish or if you're not truthful in your CV or your documents. And I've seen that happen in the course of actual promotion board review, where they get to the portion where they can discuss individual officers after all the scoring's done. And, where they're like, no, that officer didn't tell the truth about that. I was on that work group with that officer, and I can tell you he did not accomplish that. Not a good look. You never want to put anything in your documents that makes it appear that you lack integrity or that you're not truthful. And so keep that in mind as well. You don't know who's going to be on your promotion board, so you want to get your name out there and participate. But then because you don't know who's going to be on there, you don't want to say anything to where someone who is aware of the thing you're talking about can say, no, that's not true. So you definitely want to mention not just membership only, but talk about what you've contributed. Now you can see there they talk about regional and national recruitment events. Okay, so going to the next slide, here's my take on this information. So the yellow highlight indicates, I think, areas where they should keep it, and it's good information, the EPAC, the national and recruitment events. However, what are the actual national and regional events? Why don't you list the specific events as well as the dates of those events? Keep in mind your officer statement, you only get one officer statement. And that means it needs to encompass a career or at least the last 5 to 10 years or so, because board members they don't get to see your previous OS where you talked about what you did 6 years ago or 4 years ago or 3 years ago. They're only going to see the one. So it's absolutely fine to go back 5 years and to list things, or even 10 years, because I was an aide de camp to Admiral Moritsugu when he was acting Surgeon General. Of course, I'm keeping that on there, even though it was in 2008, I think it was. Does not matter. That was on my officer statement and on my CV when I went up for promotion a couple years ago. Absolutely. So, keeping in mind that significant contributions or significant events you can keep on there, and because it's covering a, a large period, you can go back a ways. So keep that in mind as well. It's not just the last year, the last 2 years. This is the only OS they're going to see, and they want to see that you've been involved in the Corps for many years and that you're not just now getting involved because you're up for promotion. So having involvement from 3, 4, 5, 6 years ago shows that as well. And then I just kind of struck out the other stuff that doesn't belong. Contributing member of the IHS National Water and Wastewater Modeling Work Group. What does that have to do with your support of PHS activities? Nothing. Contributing member of Alaska area. This wasn't Alaska area, but I changed it to say that it was. Construction specification work group. What does that have to do with PHS support activities? It doesn't. So these are things that, again, are on the CV. These are things that can be covered under the reviewing official statement, which is actually meant to capture what you've contributed to the agency mission. And so you'll see there, federal lead of the IHS federal management and other things don't belong. So I've stricken that. The deployment to IHS Great Plains area, support mission in Rosebud, that's great. That can stay. Acting executive officer, not relevant to this particular document. Great work. It's good you did it. It's great support of the IHS mission, just not appropriate for this particular document. So hopefully everybody kind of sees the theme here and what I'm going for and what I'm trying to convey. The second portion and the third bullet, so your commitment to visibility as an officer. So here, and vision and expectations of a career. So here are the things that were listed in the actual officer statement. Attended and completed officer basic course and awarded the CCTR. Fantastic. How's that visibility as an officer? Everybody there is an officer because you were just commissioned. So that's not really support. Then representing the USPHS as an officer at meetings and giving presentations to internal and external customers, that's great. That is what visibility is. Staffing recruitment booths at university career fairs, that's great. Mentoring, great. Um, but there's room for improvement in these as well. Basic readiness qualified, maintain readiness through, I'm not sure how that's visibility as an officer, maybe by saying I'm fit, but I feel like that's a stretch. Um, Commission Officers Association, pet peeve alert here. Commissioned. It drives me crazy to see actual commissioned officers put commission with no ED officers, or to say commission corp, CORP without the S, and not recognize that that's not correct. As officers, we ought to know which uniform service we're a member of and be able to get the name correct. So, Commissioned Officers Association. Really, member of COA, that really could have gone in the first bullet, but then also, what did you do as a member? So here is kind of my take on it. Um, so I've crossed out and put in red the things that I don't think belong there. Some of my questions are in red, like what are the meetings and presentations that you gave? Give some examples with the dates, just month and year, it doesn't have to be the day. With COA, specify the actual contribution and also put that under number one. Wear the appropriate office uniform daily with pride. Yes, that's an expectation. At this point, I don't know that you even need to say that you wear it daily with pride. You better be, because that is a condition of service and the expectation for everyone. Under the third bullet, you'll see I crossed out successfully filling an 05 billet at an 04 grade. That's fantastic. Not relevant to your vision and expectations of a career. Dedicated to a long-term career and retirement in the US. Everybody says that. I plan to retire in 20 years. Well, the reality is not everyone's going to retire in 30 years. Let's say a lot of people say, I'm going to work for 30 years in the Corps. I mean, it's so generic. Um, find other ways of talking about your vision and expectations that are tailored to what you are already doing and what you're working towards. I mentioned the master's degree, and this person put they're pursuing their master's degree in engineering management. Then talk about how you're going to use it to advance public health and advance the core. Um, and so those are just some examples of things not to do, as well as how it can be done a little bit differently under bullets 2 and 3. Notice the spacing though, there is that blank line between section 2 and 3. So before he moved from section 2 to section 3, he hit enter a couple times to put a blank line. You should do that. You definitely want to have a blank line in between each section of the OS and each section of the ROS. And why is that? Keep in mind, board members are literally looking at thousands of documents on a computer screen. They value white space. Do not try to fill up every space on the paper with no white space. It will all run together. So having even something as simple as one blank line between section 1 and section 2 before you start with section 2 is a big help. If you don't put that space there, it really can all run together and really will disadvantage you or has the potential to if they can't see what you're trying to convey quickly. Um, the other thing I suggest is when you are listing these things to have a good order. So either to list it chronologically with the most recent at the top of each section and work your way down to the least recent. Like in my example where I talked about being an aide de camp, that was like the last part of my section 1 because it was so long ago. I'm not going to put that right up top, but I'm going to start with the stuff that I'm doing that is most recent as well as most impactful. Because if they don't have a lot of time to get through everything and they're just skimming, I want them to see the most recent and impactful stuff at the beginning of each section. And also, if you're in the engineering category, they want to see it in a logical order. So make sure that it makes sense as well. So to summarize, avoid paragraphs also, and I don't think I said that, unless value is added. So I don't think in most cases value is added with paragraphs in an officer statement usually, and they don't even have to be full sentences as we just saw. Bullet points. They just want to see what you did, what you contributed, what you remember of, what you did and how you supported the core. Doesn't require paragraphs and full sentences. And bulleted, I think, makes it easier for them to see quickly and concisely. You'll see that when we talk about reviewing official statement, I actually think paragraphs are more valuable for the reviewing official statement, though, and I'll tell you why. I mentioned highlight the most impactful accomplishments, specify contribution, not just membership. The focus is on core, community, officership, PHS, Commission Core. And then you can also use it to address core-related underdeveloped areas. So for instance, um, I've been in positions where I've not been able to deploy since Hurricane Katrina in 2005. That was the last time that I was permitted to deploy. And so I did. I put a sentence on there under, I think it was bullet one, that says, ready and willing to deploy. However, unable to due to mission, uh, either I forget what I put, like resources or mission priorities or something. But essentially, just to put it out there, oh yeah, I would love to. I just cannot because of um, the lack of resources here to allow me. And you don't have to say a lot. You don't need to go into a big whole thing because no one has time to read it anyway. But it is a way to just address what could be perceived as a weakness. And I want to clarify, there is no expectation that every officer has deployed. Board members still understand that not every officer can deploy. Um, that's kind of how it is. And so I don't want you to hear what I'm not saying. That's just one example. And we'll talk more in the reviewing official statement about other types of perceived weaknesses and backup statements with documentation again. So, as you can, if you're saying you participated in this big thing, um, and there was like a unit award as a result, you'll want to have that in your file. Or typically, if COA will send out a thank you letter for your participation in something that you've done with them, or your PAC will, you'll just want to upload those things into your EOPF. So here is another example of an officer statement of an officer who is in my division. I actually helped him prepare his documents. He has a lot of activities, a lot of activities. So I just wanted to show this as another way of presenting your information. So in this case, we use bullets, but then also sub-bullets because under AN COAC, for instance, the American Indian Alaska Native Commissioned Officers Advisory Committee, he had so many different positions and different things. We sub-bulleted it under that as a bullet, under that bullet to make it easier. So you don't have to go put them all in a linearly separated by commas or semicolons. You can sub-bullet out like this and then go back into your bullets. And so I just wanted to show this as an example of another way to do it and how you can really quickly see, wow, he's done a lot. And recently, 2019, you see the dates there. You can very quickly go down and probably in a minute or two, you can see all the things that he has done and see that this is a very involved officer. So I just wanted to present this as another, I think, way of doing it that is helpful in terms of the goal of allowing board members to glean your information. Reviewing official statement, it allows the agency to provide input on your promotion readiness, leadership attributes, and your contributions to the agency mission. Reviewing official is your federal supervisor if you're detailed through MOA to a tribe or tribal organization, and then your second line supervisor if you're assigned to a federal site. Now it is the last page of the online core, or if you did a transfer core that served as your annual core, you'll need to fill out the PDF ROS, and that will also accompany your PDF core. So now we hear officers saying, I can't find my ROS, it's not in my EOPF. Remember, it's page 5 of your online core now. Definitely want to inform your supervisor and reviewing official well in advance of being up for promotion, preparing them for what they're going to have to do, asking them to prepare the reviewing official statement. You can provide the link to the ROS section, and you can draft the supporting document or give them bullets. If they use it, great. If they don't, that's fine too. But oftentimes, the reviewing official may not know you well, and so they really will rely on that document in order to complete it. And who's going to know better than you what you've accomplished? Again, focus is on the agency command, not the core. That's not where you need to be talking about your deployments or you're a member of an RDF team and some of those things. That's OS. This is all about agency command and therefore IHS contribution, or if you're detailed to a tribal organization, contribution to that organization. Here, paragraphs may be more valuable than bullets, and I'll show you why. I just feel like it tells a story. It allows the reviewing official to demonstrate their support of you and how much they value you and what you've brought to the organization, I think better than bullets. And then you can use it to confirm statements and other documents and or address perceived weaknesses. So for instance, if you lack mobility, like I mentioned, but that position would be hard to fill if you were to leave. The reviewing official can say that in the reviewing official statement that you've been there for the amount of time you have, and they're so grateful because if you were to leave, that position would be hard to fill. It lastly took 3 years to fill. Simple, concise, but addresses your lack of mobility. You can put it in your CV, but someone else saying it, the agency saying it on your behalf, lends credibility to it. And so I think it's more important and as important and more important really to have it in the reviewing official statement if that is the case. If you have a specialty that not many people will have, as I mentioned with the CRNA, that's another thing that can go into this document. Here's an example of an actual reviewing official statement that I reviewed when I was promotion coordinator, came from IHS, if I recall correctly, from the 2012. That's the whole reviewing official statement. That's all the effort that was put into it. What do you think that that conveys to a promotion board? Me, it says either the officer didn't give their RO time or that RO really does not value that officer that much and that officer is not making a significant impact because they didn't put much time and effort into that at all. Not what you want to convey, right, to a board member. Here's an example of one that I think was well done. And it uses certain words you can tell. It's with great pleasure that I recommend this person for a promotion. This person is an exemplary and decorated pharmacy officer, um, demonstrating leadership capacity beyond her current rank, distinguishes herself as a commissioned officer. So these are words that I feel like when I read this, it tells me that this reviewing official values this officer's performance, and I give it a little more weight than I would with the previous one, where it's literally like 5 bulleted statements. And so even if this officer drafted it for, who cares? If it's true, um, it speaks highly of the officer's contribution to the agency mission. Quickly, administrative requirements. These are the administrative requirements for temporary grade. Have to mention them. You have to have all required annual cores on file for the last 5 years for temporary grade, as applicable. If you've only been in the Corps for 4 years, clearly you're not going to have 5 years of cores, but it's as applicable. Current satisfactory core, a current valid license, if applicable, no current or pending adverse actions, and you have to meet and maintain readiness. What is new this year, all these things that used to be only applied after the boards adjourned now are applied on the front end. So if you looked at the message from Commission Core, and we'll be putting out a message that kind of clarifies and provides more information, but and this is captured in the POM, I think it's 821.74 on promotion precepts or promotion eligibility. All these now are applied on the front end to determine eligibility. If you are not basic ready September 1, October 1, November 1, December 1, January 1, will not even be reviewed by a promotion board. If you don't have your license on January 1, if you don't have the CORE done by January 1, you're not even going to be reviewed by the promotion board. That's how important these things are. And even if you are reviewed on the back end, you cannot fall out of readiness compliance. You cannot let your license expire, all those things. So these have to be met and they have to be maintained. Permanent grade, they are similar. Instead of 5 years of COREs, it has to be the current satisfactory CORE. All the other things, what's different in with permanent grade, you have to have a current 5-year physical on file. Now that's to meet basic readiness anyway, but you also have to send in the report of medical history, the DD 2807-1, and the accompanying disclosure statement. The DD 2807-1 report of medical history, you don't sign it. You don't have to have a provider sign it. That accompanying disclosure statement is where you sign and you date it. It has to be current within 1 year of the board's meeting. That means it has to be dated between May 1 for this upcoming cycle, May 1 of 2019 through April 30th of 2020. The officers have their permanent promotion removed because they failed to submit those two forms together. So please hear me and make sure if you're out for permanent promotion, do it now because it's within the window while you remember me saying it. Go fill out the 2807-1, sign and date the accompanying disclosure statement, and upload that through eDocu. It is a requirement. And really what that does is instead of you having to do another physical every time you're up for permanent promotion, it just lets you self-report on your physical well-being. Um, and so in that way, it actually is a lighter requirement than what it could be in terms of doing a physical every year you're up for permanent promotion. So really quickly, just to summarize some tips, just remember the basics. Put your name and serial number on documents. Remember the guidelines in terms of format. Always verify your documents got into your EOPF. After submitting them, after giving reasonable time for CCHQ to upload them, there had been a major backlog. There will be another backlog, or maybe towards the promotion, the submission deadline. The earlier you get your documents in, the less likely you'll run up against the backlog. But once the coast is clear, definitely check to make sure your documents got into your EOPF. You have recourse. We can work on it if we discover that something is missing before the boards meet. Once the boards meet and they've scored you and you didn't have it, it will be very difficult to go back and say, that's the reason I did not get promoted because they didn't put that document in. So definitely try to help us help you by checking and letting us know earlier on that something's missing. Use the promotion checklist on CCMIS under the promotions menu to make sure you've submitted everything by the appropriate deadline. Fill all administrative requirements, not just at promotion time, but at all times. I mentioned promotion boards now see readiness history, so you can't let up on that ever. And don't give up. If you've been up multiple times and unsuccessful, don't give up. It's all based on the pool. It's all based on changing values and expectations. Just do not give up. I've seen officers on their 7th try get promoted. And so if you feel discouraged, if you're not sure what you need to do differently, contact us and we can discuss. Take responsibility. Make sure you're aware of the policy, the checklist, and the deadlines. It's not okay to say, I didn't know. It's your responsibility to know or to find out who does know and talk to that person. And as related to that, make sure you're talking to people who are truly subject matter experts and not just well-meaning officers. One of the reasons we see the officer statements where so much information on IHS is included is because well-meaning officers helping each other and telling each other, do this, do this. Well-meaning, well-intentioned, but wrong, mistaken. So make sure you're talking to someone with actual subject matter expertise. Ensure your credentials don't expire. Make sure you update your new license before the other one expires whenever possible. Same with your credentials. Make sure your PIR and EOPF are correct. You can submit corrections to PHS OPF fix at hhs.gov, but please contact us first because a lot of times when you think it's a mistake, it isn't. And we can help clarify those things if it's not a mistake, and we don't want to bog CCHQ down with questions and inquiries that really they don't need to answer. We want them to focus on the work that we really do need them to get done. But also, if there really is an issue, we can then go to CCHQ on your behalf, which in some cases might elicit a quicker response and a quick resolution. So let us help you with that. And then always keep proof of submission of your documents. Take screenshots, save the automated emails that says something was successfully uploaded, anything that you can have that will verify that you submitted it. Make sure your CV is formatted correctly, don't embellish, concise and clear, look at the benchmarks, the policy, the POM, um, all these things that I talked about. Spend appropriate time. If you don't agree with your COER um, and have valid reasons, consider a rebuttal. You don't have to rebut it. And I only say that because if you get a COER, and I don't mean rebutting a COER because you got a 6 instead of a 7. That's not what I mean. I mean, if there are statements there that may be disparaging or you were rated low, and a 6 is not low, for a particular element, and you think it's unjust, the only way the board member will know that or have the benefit of your explanation is if you submit a rebuttal. So not saying you should or you have to, but just consider that. And then just verify everything is in there. If you can avoid it, don't wait to the EOPF deadline. So you can try to avoid the crush that inevitably happens every year, and definitely seek help. Here are some places to find help. Here's the promotions menu of CCMIS. You'll find the benchmarks, the checklist, links to pretty much everything that you need. And then here are the policies. You go to the table of contents under the policy, the ECCIS, the issuance system. You can find them by clicking on like book 1, then going to chapter 2, then section 2, and you'll see that the numbers actually relate to the book, chapter, and section. So Commission Core Directive 122 is book 1, chapter 2, section 2. Temporary grade policy, that's CCI 332.01, that's because it's book 3, chapter 3, section 2. And then the POM as well. Then feel free to always contact us. Your PAC or your PAG and your categories also can be very helpful. And then that's just a summary. I won't go over that. You can read it. Just making sure you tailor your documents to your audience and to your goals is the main thing that I want to highlight there. So with that, I want to thank you all for your attention. I hope that this information has been helpful, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you may have. Feel free to unmute your phone to answer any question, to ask any questions. And then if you don't have audio, you don't have a microphone, you can feel free to type your question in the text box and we'll read it off and get you an answer.
Can you hear me?